Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Wilcox. I'm the program director for TheDream.Us, and we're very happy to have you joining us today. This info session is focused on helping undocumented students who do not have work authorization find income opportunities. These students have options for income generation, and colleges can help inform and prepare them for these options. We will not be focusing on students who have work authorization in DACA. For information on employment for these students, we have included resources in a Google folder that we will be sharing with you today. However, given the possible end of DACA, it is also important to let these students know of the income options that we will be presenting today. There's a lot of anxiety among those with DACA, and informing them of these income options without authorization can help alleviate some of this anxiety. This webinar is brought to you by 4 different organizations: the President's Alliance, a nonpartisan alliance of over 400 colleges and university presidents and chancellors who are committed to supporting immigration policies and practices. Also, the Democracy at Work Institute, which through a worker cooperative model expands business ownership opportunities to people locked out of good jobs, especially for immigrants and communities of color. Also joining is Immigrants Rising, which empowers undocumented young people to achieve educational career goals, and TheDream.Us, the nation's largest college access and success organization for undocumented students. This webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with all of you in a couple of days. We will also be sharing the PowerPoint and all other resources in a Google Drive link. So let's go over our agenda for today. We will be going over 4 different items. One is how colleges can help these students, a little bit about the legal landscape, and then we'll go deeper on the different income options available to students without work authorization. Then we will have a great panel of advocates and college administrators who have created these opportunities at the universities. And finally, we will share many resources with you. Right now, if you look at your chat box, you will be able to see a link with the Google folder with all those resources. Throughout the webinar, you will be able to ask questions. Please use the Q&A box to ask those questions, and we will be answering the questions via the Q&A box or live through different question periods throughout the webinar. So now let me introduce the 2 main presenters. We are very happy to have Ileana Perez, who immigrated from Mexico at the age of 8. She holds a PhD in education, and her research and work focuses on immigrant entrepreneurship. She has presented at various conferences and college campuses on this topic and currently leads this type of work at Immigrants Rising. Joining her, we have Vanessa Brandsburg, who came to San Diego, California from Argentina when she was 7 years old. She's a social worker by training and an experienced developer of worker cooperatives, all led by immigrants, people of color, and women, in which they have employed over 250 worker owners. She currently leads these efforts at the Democracy of Workers Institute. And with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Ileana to start sharing some of her knowledge. Go ahead, Ileana.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Tanya. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. And so we thought that we would start off this conversation by sharing some information about what colleges can do to support undocumented students. We know that there's a lot of anxiety, particularly around the possibility of DACA getting rescinded. And we know that DACA actually has not been available to new applicants for 3 years now. So there are many undocumented students right now that are entering colleges and universities across the country without access to work authorization. So a couple of points about what colleges can do to support. Number one is to become familiar with our resources. And throughout the presentation, we'll be sharing a lot of information about all the resources that we have available to everyone online. Also, with the creating fellowships is a great way for colleges and universities to be able to create professional development opportunities that are paid and which do not require work authorization. So we'll be definitely talking a lot more about this in detail. You can also refer students to on-campus entrepreneurship training programs. So in my slides, I'll be talking a lot about how it is that undocumented individuals can pursue these options. But beyond that, I definitely recommend taking advantage of existing programs so that the students can get additional training. We also encourage students to take classes in business school, definitely taking advantage again of the great curriculum that has been developed at existing business schools so that students can get additional knowledge about these particular topics. We recommend promoting and supporting the worker cooperative business model, which you will hear about when Vanessa speaks about their work at Democracy at Work Institute. We also recommend identifying local service providers on venturize.org. Venturize.org is a web page that is managed by the Small Business Majority, and it's a great tool to identify a local service provider anywhere across the country. Lastly, we recommend creating entrepreneurship programming specifically for undocumented students, and you'll all get an opportunity to hear from the great work that is being done at LA Trade Tech College, which created a program specifically for undocumented students to learn about these options. Next slide, please. So we thought we would take just a quick minute to do a poll to learn a little bit about what you all are doing at your respective colleges and universities. So if you could please take a couple of seconds to just indicate what it is that you are currently offer to undocumented students at your college. And I see in the chat box that somebody indicated having scholarships available to undocumented students, which is not on the list. So thank you so much for sharing that. Student groups for undocumented students as well is being added to the chat box. Some paid internship opportunities as well. So I definitely see a lot of scholarships coming up in the chat box here. Legal support as well. And I see some work study, which I imagine is specifically for DACA recipients who do have work authorization. Honorariums, okay, great. Okay, if you can start casting your final votes. Okay, if we can close the poll now and let's see the results. So it looks here, let's see, so we have about a third of you are offering fellowships, which is great. Some entrepreneurship training, a little bit of information about independent contracting, a little bit of information about worker cooperatives, some information about starting a business, and less than half are not offering any of this. So this is a great opportunity to learn about these options and implement these at your college and university. Thank you everybody for participating in the poll. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about income generation through independent contracting and business startup. And throughout the presentation, you'll be hearing lots of different options of how undocumented individuals, regardless of immigration status, can be able to make money. So first of all, I'd like to say that these are opportunities that are available to anyone regardless of immigration status. These are not opportunities exclusive to undocumented students, which means that you can definitely share all this information with all of your students. But what is particularly different about these options is that it is not employment. And I'll talk a little bit about legally why employment is an issue, but undocumented students who do not have work authorization face many challenges, particularly related to the ability to be able to generate income, make money. And so the way we've thought about sort of explaining these alternative ways to make money is really sort of looked at in two different ways. So one way is to think about the concept of freelancing, and many of you may be familiar with independent contracting, professional consulting opportunities, or even participating in the gig economy. And all of these options generally don't require sort of the formal definition of entrepreneurship, which is to incorporate in a business. And in fact, 1 in 4 individuals across the US, regardless of immigration status, are actually participating in the gig economy, particularly because it's relatively easy to enter the gig economy. Oftentimes through technology platforms, individuals can find this kind of work that is available. Another way to think about these options is to think of the formal definition of entrepreneurship, which involves incorporating into a business structure. And there are lots of ways to incorporate into a business. So proprietorships, an individual owns that business, partnerships, a couple of individuals own that business, and there are many actually different ways to incorporate. But again, the point is that one is sort of a relatively easy way for particularly students to be able to learn about these options and then slowly evolve into the possibility of incorporating into a business. Next slide, please. So many of you probably have the question related to how is it legally that immigrants, regardless of immigration status, can pursue these options? Well, it's all embedded in federal law. So many of you may be familiar with IRCA, which is the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, which was the last amnesty that adjusted the status of millions of undocumented individuals. At the same time that it adjusted the status of millions of undocumented people at the time, it also intended to bar any other undocumented individuals from coming into the country. And the way it did that is that it established the I-9 form, and probably all of you who work as employees have had to fill out an I-9 form, which requires work authorization and a social security number. And so that is really the biggest challenge that currently exists for the 11 undocumented people in this country, is that legally undocumented people cannot be hired as employees. However, there was an exception that was embedded in IRCA that basically states that individuals who wish to come to this country, and typically the way IRCA talks about an individual is a foreigner. So foreigner who wish to come to this country to invest and to generate income in other means that are not employment can actually do so without needing work authorization or even a social security number. And the way that this is managed is actually managed by the Internal Revenue Service, which is in charge of handing out something called an individual tax ID number, which can be used for to pay taxes. So the whole purpose of the ITIN is for individuals to be able to come to this country, establish a business, be able to have interest accounts, and as long as everybody pays their taxes with the ITIN. So again, the biggest differences with all of these opportunities that we're going to talk about today is that they do not require a green card and that they do not require a social security number. Next slide, please. So the first option I'm going to talk about is independent contracting. And independent contracting is basically when an individual controls his or her own work and is able to do work for multiple clients. Some of you may be actually engaging in some professional consulting opportunities, and it's basically the ability for, it gives the ability for people to engage in different type of work, again, without work authorization. The earnings of independent contractors are subject to self-employment tax, which is where the ITIN comes into play. It is very important to understand that independent contracting is very different from employment. I often find that a lot of young students, particularly young undocumented students, often try to apply for like entry-level employment positions, and then They can make it all the way up through an interview and then have to disclose that they're undocumented and that in fact they don't have a green card or social security number, and then may try to turn that employment into an independent contracting opportunity. And that's not the way it works. Independent contracting does have to follow the IRS common law rules, which are basically intended to ensure that the independent contractor is in fact holding control of the work. They are the ones that determine their hourly rates and the duration of the contract, and the relationship is clearly an independent contractor versus client relationship. And we have a lot more information on this topic in the resources that you can find on the Google Drive. Next slide, please. So we do have a guide that we came out with just a couple of months ago, 5 tips for educators to help students get started. So the guide goes into much more detail. I won't go in through all of the bullet points, but I definitely recommend that you check out this guide to really dive deep into all the different considerations to be able to support students who are interested in starting work as independent contractors. Next slide, please. So another great option for individuals to be able to generate income is the establishment of a business. And there are lots of benefits for individuals to start a business, particularly undocumented individuals. One is that there's an added layer of identity protection between an individual and a business. When somebody incorporates as a business, they will be able to get something called an employer identification number, which is a number for a business. And all the forms that are required, for tax purposes, will then be filled out in the name of the business rather than the individual. It's also a great way to avoid questions related to immigration status and work authorization. As I mentioned before, I've had a lot of people reach out to me and trying to figure out how to have that conversation around immigration status and why a particular employer cannot hire somebody as who is undocumented. So when somebody owns a business, it's much easier to market yourself as a business rather than an individual trying to work as an independent contractor. I saw that a few questions are popping up on the chat box related to AB5. I do have a couple of minutes to answer some questions, so I can go a little bit deeper into AB5, but basically what AB5 is mandates is for employers to properly categorize independent contractors. So when somebody incorporates into a business, it's much easier to pass some of the tests that are associated with, in particular, with bills such as AB5. Once somebody incorporates as a business, it's also much easier to access financial capital for a business. Individuals can actually establish credit and get a checking account, get a personal credit card with an ITIN. And once somebody incorporates into a business, once they get the EIN, they can actually go into a bank and get business credit cards and business loans for the business. Once somebody incorporates, it's much easier to also get larger contracts and be more competitive in a bidding process for a contract. Lastly, there are some cost-effective benefits such as lower health insurance premiums for individuals who are business owners. Next slide, please. So the third option, which we'll hear more about throughout the panel, is the fellowship opportunity. So this is really a great way for colleges and universities to establish professional development opportunities regardless of work authorization. Through a fellowship, colleges and universities can give a stipend or an amount of money for individuals who are pursuing a particular study or research project. Fellowships can also be sponsored by other entities. So nonprofit organizations such as Immigrants Rising can also create fellowship programs that are a great way for undocumented students to be able to get additional professional development. Next slide, please. And so a couple of guidelines I'm going to share related to designing fellowships. By the way, we have an entire resource all about the creation and design of the fellowship program. But generally, fellowship should provide training, hands-on experience. It really needs to be categorized as a professional development experience for the students. The relationship between fellows, grantors should resemble a trainee-trainer type of mentor-mentee, advisee-advisor relationship, not an employment type of relationship. The primary purpose of the study research project has to benefit the fellow's education, professional growth, or training, not the entity itself that is sponsoring these fellowships. And lastly, grantors can offer stipends to fellows as long as the stipends are not considered wages. And oftentimes the fellowship is actually categorized as a scholarship when it's being administered by a college or university. But again, we'll hear a lot more of that during the panel. So now I'm going to take a few minutes. We have exactly about 8 minutes for some questions related to the content that I just shared.
Thank you, Ileana, for sharing all that information. Let me make a clarification that when we say these are options regardless of your immigration status, that does not include international students. The independent contracting or starting your business does not apply for international students, but it does apply for all other students, dreamers who have been here since they were young and don't have a work authorization. So let me see a couple of questions, Ileana. Kathleen Robles says, USCIS website states that federal law prohibits individuals or businesses from contracting with an independent contractor knowing that that contractor is not authorized to work in the US. We are hearing from some immigration lawyers that green card application process asks applicants if they have ever worked unauthorized. Does independent contracting could create a concern for those who eventually apply for a green card?
No, that's a great question. So that particular quote, it actually prohibits clients. So it's not the actual worker themselves. So the individual who is trying to do independent contracting or start a business, so that quote does not refer to the worker, it refers to the client. And basically what it refers to is, if you think about sort of the same way that employers are barred from hiring undocumented employees, it's the same thing for clients. But what's different about independent contracting and business ownership, it's that clients can only be held at fault if they knowingly engage with an undocumented person. And what ends up happening with independent contracting and business ownership is that the clients have no way of really knowing whether somebody's undocumented or not, because it's not part of any of the questions. So a W-9 form is what is used between a client and an independent contractor or business owner. And the W-9 form does not ask for proof of work authorization, and it also does not ask for social security number. And so because of that, there's actually no way for a client to even know that somebody's undocumented. The challenge is when a client is trying to engage with somebody, when that particular worker states that they're undocumented. And typically the knowingly piece refers to like an email exchange or some type of written communication, where in the case of a subpoena could come out that that person actually, the client actually knew that that person was undocumented. So typically what I suggest is for the undocumented person to not mention their immigration status at all. It shouldn't come up because it's not required. There's no work authorization associated with the forms that are required, or even a social security number. There's no reason for an undocumented person to have to disclose their immigration status. And then to answer the second part of the question about the repercussions for the worker themselves, it hasn't been a challenge. We've actually worked very closely with several lawyers to analyze if this has ever played out in the case of an adjustment of status, and it hasn't come up. Again, particularly because federal law, as stated in IRCA, really doesn't say anything about independent contracting or business ownership. It just sort of leaves it open-ended. It doesn't become a challenge for somebody who's trying to adjust their status. In fact, independent contractors and business owners, when they file their taxes, that's actually a huge benefit in the possibility of an undocumented person adjusting their status.
Great, thank you, Ileana. Do you have any suggestions for students who are undocumented and express that they don't feel like they're good at business classes, or they don't want to go into business?
Yeah, that's definitely by far one of the biggest challenges we come across. And oftentimes I've been giving these presentations for many years now, and it's great for students to know that a work authorization is not required for these options, but to actually get started is actually quite complicated. It really requires sort of a shift in mindset. So it really requires students thinking that, most students go to college and think that employment is the only option. And that's sort of how we're all groomed. I know my entire undergraduate, graduate career, no one ever told me that I could actually do professional consulting, work on my own, or start a business. So it really does require shifting that mindset and helping students develop that entrepreneurial mindset. And that's why I suggest starting off with sort of easier entrepreneurial concepts or entrepreneurial avenues such as the gig economy, where it's rather easy to join. And I'll share a couple of tools that you can share with your students to help students start to think about, what can I do on my own? Some of the easiest things that I suggest are tutoring. Tutoring is a great way for students to be able to make some money on the side and sort of get a feel for what that's like. Website design, social media, marketing. I mean, a lot of students have natural skills because most students are naturally on social media. So it's a great way to market themselves. Data analytics. Students can get a data analytics crash course. They can take the Google Analytics certificate and be able to start doing that kind of work and market themselves with those particular skills. So it really does take, again, that shift in mindset to move away from employment as the only avenue to be able to make money to additional ways that individuals can make money.
Great. And also, I'm going to ask Sadhana to look at some questions from the Q&A box. Sadhana, could you see if there's a question from the Q&A box?
Yes. Yes, we have some questions coming in the Q&A box. One question: if a student wants to start a business, what are some ideas of where they can get the original capital?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so venturize.org, again, is a great resource. On venturize.org, anyone can go in, put in their zip code, and then they'll get a long list of organizations that can provide either support establishing a business or accessing financial capital. We also have a great guide called Accessing Financial Capital for Yourself and for Your Business, where we talk about how undocumented individuals can build credit with their ITIN, can then apply for personal banking, and then can transition into business banking. So definitely recommend checking out that resource.
Okay, another question is, if an undocumented individual starts a business, can they legally hire staff?
Yes, so that's actually another benefit of incorporating into a business. When somebody incorporates either as a sole proprietorship, a partnership, C corporation, they'll get the employer identification number, which, by the way, people can get with an ITIN and with an EIN. And once somebody incorporates into a business, they can hire employees. Of course, the employees have to have work authorization. And we actually have wonderful stories that we've been collecting of undocumented business owners who themselves are undocumented, but actually hire many US citizens who have work authorization.
Great, thank you, Eliana. With that, let's move on to have Vanessa talk to us about worker co-ops.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me today present on this webinar. So I am going to be speaking today about Democracy at Work Institute's Rapid Response Cooperative Development Program, or the RRC as we've been calling it. So the purpose of my presentation is basically to introduce you to the RRC model so that you can have information on how worker cooperatives are a tool to organize young professionals with barriers to work into contractual relationships with their clients. We think that this new worker cooperative model to replicate staffing companies is a timely and well-vetted mechanism that responds to a crisis that young people with barriers to work are experiencing. So in other words, they're not being able to access well-paying jobs in their area of work, which has and can lead to economic hardship. So as many of you know, and we've been talking about today, work authorization is a barrier to employment for highly skilled and qualified workers at times. Fellowships will end at certain points. They also can't be an employee, right? If we're talking about folks without authorization to work. And then for others who have considered independent contracting work, it could be somewhat burdensome perhaps to manage your own invoicing, contracting, and other sort of admin work that comes along with it. And so I'm going to be talking about an entrepreneurship angle, specifically the worker cooperative model. So next slide, please. Great. So the rapid response cooperative model serves as a legal buffer between workers and clients. And so this type of affiliation between the cooperative, the client, and the worker owner makes a working relationship possible while protecting the workers themselves. So in the image that you're looking at here, what we see is that consultants or the student worker owner is on the left side, and then the client organization is on the right side. The student worker would join the Radiate Consulting Cooperative, and then the client organization would utilize the Radiate services. So let's talk a little bit about what a rapid response co-op entails. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to go over the essential elements of what makes a rapid response cooperative, or as we've been calling it, Radiate Consulting. So the first is that it's a business structured as an LLC, which is a limited liability company, specifically is the legal term. And this means that the worker owners have limited liability in the company and work as partners. And so they are protected through this legal entity formation. Secondly, it has shared ownership. So members are highly autonomous. All members are basically responsible for governing the business and assuring that the operations are effective. I do want to say that we've specifically created this kind of model so that the governance is more on the light end. And so the participation is really when the members join for their member meetings that have been on a quarterly basis, because we really do want to make sure that the most of the focus for these worker owners are on actually on doing the work, on working with their clients and not having to spend too much time on governing the business. The third essential aspect is that it operates according to a set of principles. These are actually the 7 international principles of cooperatives. And so just to highlight a couple of the principles that are especially relevant to the rapid response model are voluntary and open membership, and then also democratic member control. So both of these principles basically speak to the fact that the rapid response co-op is designed to be accessible and responsive to people who need to generate income despite barriers. And then also that it offers them an opportunity to self-govern and have that kind of that benefit. Another aspect is that members invest in the business. And so all worker owners in these cooperatives that we're helping to form are required to contribute what's called a capital contribution of $500 over a period of 1 year. And so one of the reasons why there is a capital contribution, of course, is to actually have some working capital for the business, but then also to have a sense of ownership in joining that entity. The next is that each member does have 1 vote. This is actually a cornerstone of worker ownership. All members have an equal voice that's exercised through voting. Excuse me. And so in every meeting, there are decisions that have to be made, and then outside of meetings as well. And so each member has equal power in that way. And then lastly, the structure itself is unique. And so a member administrator handles the back office management. So as a staffing cooperative, all invoicing, payments, tax filings, and bookkeeping are managed by a member administrator, which is somebody from Democracy at Work Institute for the first year. And then after the first year, it does become one of the worker owners after they've been mentored. And they ultimately, the idea is to take off the burden of the members so that they can focus on their work. Next slide. So now I wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing for the last 3 years. Essentially, we've been piloting this project by creating 2 rapid response cooperatives called Radiate Consulting. The first was in Los Angeles, California, and then the second one is in New York City. So I'm going to share with you how Radiate Consulting New York City works specifically so that you can get a sense for what the business offers, how the members participate, and then also how clients can engage with the cooperative and utilize its services. So this photo that you're looking at here shows the member owners of Radiate Consulting New York City, which is our second rapid response co-op. It was formed in 2019, just last year, due to a partnership between Democracy at Work Institute and the City University of New York's Mexican Studies Institute, BECAS program. We will have Jose Higuera, CUNY's Mexican Studies Institute Deputy Director, speaking right after me actually in the panel about their experience partnering with us to support the creation of a Radiate New York City. So Radiate Consulting NYC is made up of 5 worker owners at the moment and will be growing in the spring by another 5 to 10 workers who are professional consultants. So they work for nonprofits, universities, and small businesses. The cooperative at this moment is offering IT and database support, training and curriculum development, interpretation, translation services, bookkeeping, financial management, web development, programming, and then also tutoring. You may wonder, how are the types of services that these co-ops provide determined? So there's a couple of different factors. One is what the actual applicants coming into the cooperative offer and specialize in, and then also maybe what degrees they hold. Also, what the needs are of the potential clients. So we assess, who the contracts will be coming into the cooperative and what their needs will be. And so we recruit considering that. And then lastly, we did conduct a feasibility study to address and sort of understand what nonprofit and small businesses needs are. And so we do recruit with that in mind. So next slide. So what are the benefits of creating, joining, and supporting the success of a Radiate Consulting cooperative? So the benefits are actually somewhat similar for both clients of Radiate Consulting and their members. First of all, it's a mission-aligned partnership designed to meet multiple needs with integrity. So what does this mean? That the members of the cooperative go into the contractual work with their clients with an intention and desire to support the mission of their client's organization, right? So if it's a nonprofit organization needing, community outreach, for example, that consultant coming from Radiate Consulting will have that in mind and will tailor the scope of work based on that. Secondly, the client organization contracts with and pays the cooperative business directly, and then works directly with its member owners. So relatedly, members are basically compensated as owners, not as employees or contractors, right? They are paid directly by the cooperative that's contracting directly with the clients, as any business would. And then lastly, another benefit is that the cooperative handles billing, the payment, the bookkeeping, tax filing, and offers member support. So there are professional development opportunities that are available many times through the partnership that DAWI creates with other institutions, such as with CUNY. So this way, the members can focus on their work, right, by having this back office admin, and then the clients can also have a seamless experience, right, working with the contractor, right, and not have to worry so much about the admin as maybe they would if they'd be working with an independent contractor that is, trying to do the work and create the invoices and, set up the taxes on time, all of that. So this is all done directly within the Radiate Consulting business. In the case of a university, right, or college, like some of you who are interested in helping students that with barriers to work, participation in a Radiate Consulting cooperative could benefit, for example, a recent graduate who has a degree, for example, I don't know, in computer science, but they cannot get hired by a company, right, or an organization because they lack that work authorization. So instead, this individual could work within the cooperative as a worker owner and contract directly with one or more clients and then get paid directly by the cooperative business. Next slide. So you may be wondering how a Radiate Consulting cooperative actually gets started. So we are actually really interested in replicating this model many times. As you saw, we have 2 co-ops, but this is really just the beginning of this project. And we want to take it to scale so that it's basically offered to more and more people with barriers to work. So the Rapid Response Co-op Initiative is basically possible because of partnerships that are formed with organizations and institutions interested in organizing their members and students that have barriers to work. Once a partnership is developed, roles are delineated, right, to set up the cooperative relatively quickly to become accessible to that partner student community. So for example, what are the roles? Democracy at Work Institute, because we have the experience in setting up worker cooperatives, working with attorneys that have vetted all the legal documents and all of that, we bring in a toolkit of vetted documents that is, for example, includes the operating agreement, the operating manual, and other sort of documents that are important in running a business. We also bring in capital to get the business started up. We already designed the brand, so that's already available. And then we provide technical assistance for the first year in an intensive way, and then on an ongoing basis, depending on how much that cooperative needs. All Radiate Consulting cooperatives will need a different amount, I think, of technical assistance, depending on who the members are and their experience. Then the partner organization role would be to bring in the workforce, or for example, or the potential members, right? So these would be, in the case of colleges and university students, who can offer services and are ready to work, or graduates. And then also they can bring in contracts to the rapid response co-ops or Radiates. They literally can have Radiate become a vendor at the university, for example, or other ways to basically connect to that Radiate Consulting co-op to offer opportunities to its members. And so Jose Yera will talk a little bit more about that specifically. So just to say it again, we are very interested in speaking with institutions and other organizations who may want to consider this option in terms of offering a path to worker ownership to its students. And then at this point, I have about 10 minutes to answer any questions that have come up from the audience. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Vanessa. We do have a couple of questions. And Sadhana, would you please read one of those questions?
Sure. For Vanessa, does Radiate Consulting all have the same business industry focus, or can people be consultants in any field?
Yes, great question. As of now, we focused on the nonprofit sector, as you've been seeing, and that obviously entails many different kinds of services, right? And that's because in our feasibility study, we saw that many documented and undocumented folks are within that sector. So we thought that would be an interesting sort of area to start with. However, we are very interested in going into other sectors. We're now spending this year doing some research on starting Radiates in the technology field, which is also broad, and then also education. So we are open to having Radiates focus on different sectors, and just making sure that there are contractual opportunities for those Radiates, right, and their worker owners.
Thank you. Another question, Sadhana?
Yes, one more question. Do they have options for healthcare if they are part of the co-op?
Yes. One thing that I didn't mention it's important is that Democracy at Work Institute was formed out of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. That's like our national, member association for worker ownership. And through the affiliation with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, the Radiate Consulting co-ops become members of this association, and therefore get to use the benefits that they offer. And a couple of the benefits that they offer are some medical insurances. So we have started with vision and dental, and then we are interested in moving forward eventually to full, medical. And then they're also offering disability starting this year. And so yes, through that association, we're going to be offering some medical insurance options for its members.
Any others, Sadhana?
I thought this is a broader question, but one came in that asked, how do you find clients?
Right. So the way that the Radiate Consulting Cooperatives identify clients is that in the very early stages of our recruiting of members, we do ask people interested in joining Radiate Consulting if they already have some opportunities. So many of the members that have joined the New York City Consulting Cooperative were connected with some internships that they had just completed, for example, through the DACA program. And so they had some relationships with these nonprofits that wanted to continue working with them, or had other projects that they wanted to engage them with. And so that was one way, right? A direct relationship with some of their professional relationships that they already held. Another is through the partnerships, as I mentioned, right? And so if we form Democracy at Work Institute a relationship with an institution like a college or university that has its own needs, right? Because it's a huge ecosystem, they would potentially utilize the Radiate Consulting services to do graphic design or to plan conferences. There's just so many different options. So those are the two main ways that we've been making sure that Radiate does get work. We also have somebody on staff at Dowie that is specialized in sales, and they also are supporting the Radiate Consulting Cooperatives in addressing or identifying work.
I have a couple more questions that have come in, Vanessa. One is, what does an institution need to do to partner to start a Radiate branch?
Mm-hmm. So just very simply, we have a conversation with you all. If you're interested, we answer your questions. We explain to you the model in a little bit more depth. And then there would be basically an identification of who they think that the potential members could be, whether they're coming from, I don't know, the Dreamer Center or an undocumented student services or just in any other ways. So we make sure that there is a group of people that would benefit and could join this cooperative. And then also we identify whether there are opportunities also to contract with Radiate. And then we basically talk about what the relationship would look like, what the roles could be. We've seen that it varies from institution to institution as far as how much or how little, right, certain institutions can do in that partnership. So in the case, for example, as in CUNY, they help to recruit the students, right, because they lead the BICAS program that Jose will talk about. And so that was one of their major roles. And if an institution, for example, wants to do more, for example, by vetting the students or by offering professional development opportunities to keep training those worker owners in the cooperative in, for example, how to create contracts or how to interview, things like that, then we would include that in like a letter of interest or an MOU that we could create to move forward as in a partnership or collaboration.
And one more, last one. Do you require a partner, or could a group of dreamers approach and work directly with you?
That's a really great question. Yes, we would definitely consider that. We know that could be, the case, that there could be different ways that these Radiate Consulting Cooperatives come together. And so we're ready to talk with different groups depending on where they're coming from. I think what's important is that the group of people that are coming and interested in organizing the co-ops can offer certain services, right? They're actually ready to be consultants. And so we need to just assess that. But we're very happy to help set up these cooperatives with the brand of Radiate folks.
Mm-hmm. And a clarification, there are a number of Radiate consulting firms, or is it everyone joining the same one?
Yes. So there are multiple Radiate Consulting cooperatives in different locations around the country, but it's a shared brand with a shared website, logo. And so there is a licensing agreement that we offer these Radiates because the background behind that is that we want to basically make it easier to start these work co-ops. They can be kind of intense to set up and take a while to set up all the governing documents, for example. So we wanted to kind of get this going for folks and even the brand, and then people can plug in and start working. So yes, there are multiple Radiate Consulting cooperatives around the country, but they all share the name and the brand.
Okay, and one last question just came in. How is the income dispersed in the consulting model, in this Radiate Consulting?
Yes. Because it's a limited liability company and they're all partners, is the legal term in the LLC world. But then in the co-op world, right, they're worker owners. What people get paid in the cooperative are called guaranteed payments. And so just again, the way that it works is if a client organization hires Radiate, they do a contract with Radiate, they pay Radiate, and then Radiate pays its worker owners with guaranteed payments. And they get literally what they earn through that contract. And then a little portion of that goes towards their capital contribution. 5% is what the co-op decided. And then there is a little bit of a fee on top of the contract total to cover the operational costs, which is a typical, practice among staffing cooperatives. But the members basically get directly everything that they made through the contract.
Mm-hmm. And Vanessa, anyone interested should contact you directly, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Would you mind putting in your email
Sure.
address in the chat box, and also know that in the Google Drive that we're sharing with you, and we can share it again right now, Sadhana, it's all the resources and contact information in this PowerPoint. Okay, so let's move on to have these three great allies, advocates, and people who have worked really hard to help undocumented students at their own institutions create opportunities, alternative opportunities for undocumented students. So joining us today, we have Dr. Elisa Hoyos Vences, who is going to be talking to us about the entrepreneurship program that she has started for undocumented students at Los Angeles Tech Trade College. Also, Oscar Teran, who started fellowships for undocumented students at UC Irvine, but he's now working at Western State College of Law. And Jose Higuera Lopez, who worked with Vanessa at Democracy at Work Institute to help set up and support a worker co-op for undocumented students at CUNY. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ileana to facilitate this panel.
Great, thank you so much, Tanya. And thank you so much to Elisa, Oscar, and Jose for joining us today on this panel. I'm very excited to engage in conversation with all of you and learn more about the great work you're all doing on the ground. So if you could all turn on your videos and unmute yourselves at this time, please. Great, thank you. I can see Oscar, Elisa, and Jose, thank you. So the first question I'm going to start off with is if you could all please describe your program and how you started the program at your respective college or university. And Jose, let's go ahead and get started with you.
Yes, thank you, Elena. So as Vanessa mentioned, we had already this the Mexican Studies Scholarship Fund, and so after it was over 7 years. Having different cohorts of students coming through CUNY throughout the 25 campuses of CUNY and graduating, we saw the need of also providing opportunities for our students to join the workforce. And because most of them were not even documented, they did not have DACA, most of them were undocumented, what we started to look for were partners to see if there were models, and it's how we got to Vanessa, to Democracy at Work Institute. And so we started the conversation to see if we could partner and they could offer options for our students, which were already self-starters and they were prepared and highly qualified members of our programs to join a co-op. And it's how we started the conversation with them. And then last year we started, our students started our graduates, the co-op.
Great, thank you so much, Jose. Oscar, would you like to share with us a bit about the fellowship model that you were able to implement?
Sure. So the fellowship that we started at the University of California, Irvine was a 3-part program. We provided an experiential learning fellowship that was a year-long placement in a partner site, which was an office somewhere on campus. We also provided a professional development seminar that student participants were able to take. Finally, we provided a scholarship in the form of compensation. And the scholarship was designed so that it provided economic parity with employment. So the scholarship was the same amount that the student would have received if they had been a student employee in the same spot. And this program, the vision for it really came from students on campus that were pushing for ways and trying to create ways to implement the skills that they were learning, that they were developing through their education. And then the implementation of the program was a partnership with the Dream Center on campus, our HR department, our Office of Financial Aid, Student Services, and our campus council.
Great, thank you so much, Oscar. And Elisa, talk to us a bit about how the entrepreneurship certificate program was started at LA Trade Tech.
Awesome. So at LA Trade Tech, the College of Business was starting to write the curriculum for an entrepreneurship certificate program that is non-credit based. So that means that it would be free to students, and it was still certified through the state of California. What we wanted to do is incorporate that with the curriculum that Immigrants Rising has included in their resources, which are webinars and workshops specifically to help our undocumented students understand how to navigate and set up an actual business, whether it was how to get their ITIN, how to do proper taxes, bookkeeping. So what we did is we fused what the curriculum is, which is laying the foundation and theoretical background on building a business, and then adding the workshops specifically for our undocumented students. And it was a collaboration with the academic side and the student services side.
Great, thank you so much. And I see that we have a lot of questions related to funding, and we will definitely get to that. But before that question, the next question is really related to the lessons that you all have learned as you worked with your college to start your specific program. Jose, what were some of the lessons learned in partnering with Democracy at Work Institute?
I think one of the biggest one was really to run it by the senior leaderships first, but through our president and also through our provost. Once they were on board and we presented the need for this partnership with DAWI, then we also have identified in our campus also one point person that would serve almost as a clearinghouse for anything that has to do with the opportunities for employment, specifically if it has to do with career development. So those opportunities for us was really important. And also, I think another lesson learned was that when we presented this option for our students was really to identify who were the self-starters. I think earlier there was a mention about are these members, should they be entrepreneurs? And yes, they should be self-starters because we only offer the, during our professional development workshops, the option, but we're not going to be, in our case, there's not going to be a lot of hand-holding. Is really, they should engage in that process themselves.
Great, and going off of that response, I think Elisa, if you can talk a little bit about the lessons learned and specifically the training component that the entrepreneurship certificate offers to the students.
Definitely one of the components was the idea that a lot of our students still have a fear of being their own boss and being able to have their own business. And so it's dispelling that myth that because they're undocumented, they cannot have a business. So what we actually did was we had to hold a number of town hall meetings in which we had other undocu hustlers come and speak to students in order to start dispelling that myth within our community, because the students were not, they weren't even interested in the certificate program because that idea of I am undocumented, I cannot have my own business. So that was one lesson. The other one was definitely being able to blend the program with the workshop. So the curriculum is being taught is complete entrepreneurship 101, but how do we blend in the actual specific information that our undocumented students need was another sort of learning point where our faculty member was pivotal in that. It was very important.
Great, thank you so much. And Oscar, what were some lessons learned in the implementation of the fellowship model?
I think for us, the biggest challenge was the paradigm shift that we really needed to engage in on our campus, because up to that point, the campus was really used to thinking of student professional development in terms of employment. And so getting them to understand that this was experiential learning, that this was professional development, but this was not employment, This was academic, this was a scholarship, and there's a completely different set of rules that allow this to be available to a broader section of students. And that took a lot of educating. Similarly to LA Trade Tech, we had a series of town halls where we hosted our administrators, just trying to explain to them why this was different and how the language was important, how the model was different. And that was effective in starting to shift that understanding. And then I think the other thing that we really learned that was important for us was that once we got this program up and running, we provided a seminar that was a professional development seminar to student participants. And initially, we had thought, well, let's partner with our Career Center. They already do a lot of education for students, but we really had to be super intentional about modifying the information that we were given so that it was relevant to the unique experience of our undocumented students who are coming in with a completely different set of questions, possibilities, background experiences. And we wanted to make sure that the seminar was responsive to that. So it was really intentionally created.
Great. And Oscar, we can move on to this, to the question that a lot of folks are asking in the Q&A, specifically related to the funding to be able to establish this fellowship program.
Yes, this was great. I think one of the things that's really powerful about the fellowship model on a college campus is that there is already funding allocated for paying student employees. That funding's there. Many departments have student employees. Many departments have that as a line item in their budget. And so what we were trying to encourage people to understand was they could take that fund and rather than using it to pay payroll, they could use it to provide a scholarship. So for us, the funding was in some ways already built in. It was just helping people understand that they could redirect some of these funds that they had. And that's how we were able to fund all of the scholarships that were given to our students. In total, we had 37 student participants, and there was $133,000 that was directed in the form of scholarships to those participants. And this was all money that was already within these departments. The last thing I'll say about the funding piece too that was really important for us was that we had intentionally gone in and gotten buy-in and talked to department heads before we approached individual supervisors asking them to accept placements. And by doing that, we were able to show them that, look, everyone's bought into this. And when we encounter questions or resistance, it was really easy to say, well, actually, campus leadership or the head of your department has already decided that this is something they want to do.
Great, thank you so much. Jose, how were you able to secure the funding for this partnership?
So basically for us, we also had a similar model also with Oscar, where we had also fellowships. There were grants or donations by private donors that wanted to set up a fund for undocumented students to help them to provide paid internships. So that was easy to do that. Once we shifted to this model now as a co-op, where really what we're trying to do is to utilize the budget allocation that we already have through other grants to hire the co-op as vendors. So that's a very simple process within CUNY in the sense of how can we just this information, this model as a co-op, and so it becomes the co-op itself, Radiate Consultant, becomes now a vendor of CUNY. So anybody within the CUNY system can hire them to do a specific service, and sometimes it is a very simple process in the sense that the budget is already there. So you just need to create this budget allocation and just hire them as vendors, and that's it.
Great, thank you so much. And Elisa, can you talk a little bit about the funding for the entrepreneurship certificate program?
So the funding actually came directly from Immigrants Rising. We applied for a grant and we were actually awarded the grant in order to launch and pilot this certificate program. Once we were awarded the grant, our institution was able to match it with some of the funds through our equity programs, and also through our adult ed block program. Because it is a non-credit certificate program, like I said, it's completely free to the students, but there's an adult ed grant that would be paying for the classes to be taken. So what we did is we searched for external funding from whether it's like I said, Immigrants Rising, which is a nonprofit, but also within our institution, we try to leverage the fact that we received a grant in order to receive additional grant from the institution to get either promotional items, supplies for our students, as well as staffing.
Great. Thank you so much to everybody. And we're actually just right on time. So I will definitely start opening it up to questions from the audience. I already saw that we have a few questions that have been coming in, but definitely if you can all start typing in your questions for the panelists in the Q&A, I will start reading off of some of those. So a couple of questions that started to come in. Can you all share fellowship or scholarship language for students who are undocumented without DACA? So I think this question is specifically related to sort of what language to use in the promotional materials for your program. So who would like to take on that question in terms of how you're marketing these programs?
I can take the first crack at that, Ileana.
Sure.
So we have language that we worked on really hard for the fellowship description, as well as the marketing. All of that language was vetted by our campus council and actually the general counsel for the University of California system before we were able to roll it out locally. And that information is going to be available on the Google Drive that you all will have access to after this webinar. So feel free to take a look at that.
Elisa, Jose, did you each want to talk about how you're marketing and sort of your usage of the term undocumented?
So on our end, because we were focusing on entrepreneurship, we looked at how students were identifying. We actually took a survey of the students that are currently at trade to ask how is it that they identified, and a lot of them were able to categorize undocu hustler as undocu entrepreneur. So what we did is a lot of our flyers had the Undocu Hustler as the actual name so that we would market it. Because we are primarily a Latinx community, we did have the flyers as well in Spanish. And so what we did is we just talked about empresarios sin documentos because we wanted to also open it up to our community, not just our college students. So in order for a larger number of our community members, which are older, to be able to understand it, we had to go back and change the Undocu Hustler per se to be a little bit more descriptive as to what we were talking or referring to.
Yes, and on our end, I think the experience of students is different depending also on how out there they are. Some of them are very comfortable being identified as undocumented. There's a whole movement of undocumented and unafraid. There are others that are in other stages, so they really don't want to be out there and just identified as undocumented. So what we did on our end is try to have a very inclusive language where if the person is undocumented, they will understand it. For example, when we had our scholarship opportunities, it was for anybody that doesn't have access to federal aid. So they understand immediately, okay, this applies for me. But if you have somebody else that is not undocumented, it doesn't apply to them. It's like, okay, it's something else. Because once you place that word undocumented, then sometimes some students will automatically opt out of it because they don't want to be identified as undocumented. They're still scared. There's a lot of fear within our communities. So we have to be very careful in the way we word it. Also, another way is the no immigration status required, or those are more in your face, but still we use it in depending on the context. But if it's out there for marketing, we will say if you have limited access to federal aid or federal opportunities, or you're left out of the job market.
Thank you so much. Another question that came in is related to the buy-in that is needed at each institution. So Gustavo is asking, which office, dean's department should he reach out to as he's trying to implement some of these programs? So we can definitely ask all of you on the panel to share sort of who specifically you went out to get the particular buy-in.
And I can start answering that question because based on the program that we were creating, we actually needed the buy-in from both the VP of Student Services and the VP of Academic Affairs because it required us to work very much with our academic side to create and get the curriculum from them, and also to continue that relationship in order to set up the classes and all that stuff with the professors. So I would say, because this person, it seems like they work in the admissions, it really starts with your student services dean and the one that is above enrollment. Depending on where you're at, if enrollment is connected to how do we get more students in, we need to make the campus more inclusive, connecting to that. Also, if you have a dean of equity or diversity, those are the ones to connect with so that you can use the data from your institution to make a case for the need of more resources being allocated to serve these students.
Jose, Oscar, did you each want to add additional information?
Yes, similar to also what Elisa is saying, for us, it was really running it through the VP of students, of also, of course, the president and the provost. But for us, it was easy to partner with Democracy at Work Institute because it was just creating this collaboration. So for us, our specific role as an institution was really to provide the students that already graduate through our program, and because they are already they were already in internships and they had the experience, they made the ideal candidates for the co-op itself. But I think also the buy-in to becoming vendors or for us to be clients of the co-op is very important to also communicate through departments that the co-op is an option. Sometimes each department has their own budget, and depending on the events that they plan throughout the year, they can hire these co-ops. I know of another instance within CUNY also where they hire a co-op in food services for catering for their events. So it varies depending on the needs, but I think it's just spreading the word that this is an option also for us as an institution to have vendors throughout these co-ops.
And I think who you get the buy-in from really does depend on what the form of your program is. So for us, since it was a fellowship with a scholarship, we really had to start with our financial aid department first because the scholarships were going to be flowing through their office. After that, we had to consider that there are some inherent risk and liability issues if this wasn't done correctly. And so that really was the responsibility of the campus council, the attorney for the university, to make sure that we got them on board and signed off on the model. And then we needed to make sure that this was understood to be completely separate from employment. And so that kind of flows through the HR department of the university, making sure that they were on board and they had signed off on it. And then finally, we needed to recruit both placement sites to host students and student participants. And so for us, we were able to recruit students in a partnership with our campus advocacy group that was student run. That was really, really important. And then we were able to recruit placement sites primarily through our student life department. That department oversees a lot of different operations and they're really well connected within the campus. But depending upon your campus community, that hub might look different for you.
We have another question specifically related to working with students in the health sciences or health affairs majors. And we understand that that particular sort of field of study has a lot of challenges related to work authorization. Can any of you speak about how your program, or whether your program, is specifically supporting these type of students?
I can go.
Sure.
So we very early on in the process throughout the Mexican Studies Scholarship Fund, when we interview them and we ask them into what field they want to go in. So sometimes it really depends on the professional licenses that each state has, or the regulations around it. For example, when we started the program, they could not go either to the education field. For example, they could not be teachers because they needed a specific certification and all the licenses. So that was changed afterwards. So then an undocumented student could study to become a teacher or to become a lawyer. But in the medical field, it's very difficult because they need to do, and probably Eliana, you can answer this better, they have to go through a vetting process of also to go into the hospitals to do internships. So it's very difficult to go into that. So we really do not have that experience because we identify them very early in the stage. So, but I know that it changes or varies depending on each state.
I think for us, we encountered similar challenges broadly in the students that we supported. There are a lot of barriers for folks that want to go into medical sciences or other STEM fields. There are a lot of efforts separate from the fellowship that the Dream Center was effective in developing along with student advocates. But as it relates just to the fellowship piece, we were able to get placement sites in a variety of different schools around campus, including the medical school and the School of Engineering. So those were helpful for students that wanted to build their resume in that direction. One challenge that we encountered was that for any of the sites hosting a student, the funds that they used in order to provide the scholarship couldn't be federal funds. And depending upon the discipline within the particular school, there might just be more federal funding that they rely upon, right? There's probably more of that happening in the School of Engineering than there was in the School of Humanities, just because of the way that their grants work. But even there, we were able to work with those schools and they were able to identify funds. They just had to know what restrictions were in place on the funds that they could use.
And for us, that hasn't been there hasn't been that situation encountered because we're focusing on the entrepreneurship portion, which means that they wouldn't have to deal with that. However, we do have students who are taking the entrepreneurship certificate program and are in nursing, which is one of the huge ones where they encounter a lot of issues because of the licensing situation here in California. What we are trying to do is get more familiar with the recent I can't remember the law, is SB 1159, I believe, here in California that just recently passed, where students are going to be able to use their ITIN number to go into the field. So we're getting more details on that, but from my side of the program, we haven't actually encountered that.
And just to add to the conversation around professional licensing, it does vary across states. And even in California with SB 1159, even though it does allow individuals to use their ITINs to take the exams, the certifications, one of the challenges we've encountered is actually in getting the hours that are needed. For example, in accounting, I'm working with somebody right now that is trying to fulfill those hours, which often happens in a lot of the health industries where a lot of those hours are, it's really complicated to be able to do that as an independent contractor or somebody who is not an employee. So it's actually something we're working on at the legislative level to see if there could be a legislative fix to the particular hourly requirement. And I know that this is a great opportunity to engage in advocacy efforts in states that do not currently have a similar bill, such as SB 1159 in California. Let's see, other questions that have come in. We have another question here from Bernadette. How quickly were you able to get the program started on your campuses, from initial discussion to launch?
I will take that. I'll start with answering that one. With us, it did take about, I'm going to say, a year and a half. We wrote for the grant, and then due to the process that it takes here in our district, in order to put the funds into place and actually roll out the funds to be able to hire the personnel and then do the programming, it took us about a year and a half to actually start the class. So even though we were awarded the grant actually the spring of 2019, we weren't able to launch our first class until fall of 2019. But it did take us a little bit of a time. Right now, we are in the third class of the 6 classes that the certificate program entails.
For us, specifically for the co-op itself, it was fairly quick because we were very lucky that when we started to investigate the different options that our students had, also the Democracy at Work Institute was exploring the option of bringing this to the East Coast. So when we started the communication, it actually took a few months, and it was because of the great support that the staff at the Democracy at Work Institute gave us. And we started the conversation, and I think it was also because of the model itself of the rapid response co-op model that it was able to get off the ground very, very quickly.
For us, it was a 3-year process from beginning to end. So the very first year was really about researching what was possible and meeting with department heads to get buy-in. So one of the first things that we actually did was we went to our law school, and I partnered with a legal professor there, and we hired 3 law school students in order to write a series of research papers all about understanding the possibilities here and some of the differences between experiential learning fellowships and employment. And then armed with that research, we were able to set up meetings with department heads where we showed them, look, this is possible, and this is how we want to structure it. In the second year, once we got buy-in from folks, we then ran a pilot group of 4 students just to show that, we could implement this model and nothing bad was going to happen, and, to show that we could actually do it. And after that pilot group, in the third year, which is this current academic year, 2019 to 2020, this is the inaugural year of the full-scale program, where we've got 37 participants in the program.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question here that came in, somewhat related to possible threats to the students, particularly as you all are working with like HR, financial aid. I believe, what threats does that pose to this process and our students as you're moving along trying to get buy-in from administrators?
In our experience with the fellowship, I think that's why we started off with really doing the research to show that this was lawful, this was possible, and there was nothing stopping us from doing it. And armed with that factual information and that research, we were able to answer any of the questions that folks had when we were contacting folks in HR or folks in financial aid. There's not a question about whether or not a school can do this. It's completely possible. Now, in terms of safety for the students, I think that we did have the benefit of operating in California, where there are state laws that protect the privacy and safety of all students, but particularly immigrant students and undocumented immigrant students. So that is a benefit that I recognize that we had. But even aside from that, there are really strict federal laws that protect the privacy of students at all universities throughout the country, FERPA being the primary one. And so information about student participants is not information that can be shared lawfully with anyone outside of the school. Or even within the school, there are protections on how that information can be shared based upon a need-to-know basis and how it impacts the work that the person is doing. So from our standpoint, we felt really comfortable that we had a program that was safe for students and was properly structured for the university.
Okay.
I want to echo what Oscar said at the end in regards to the laws that protect the key stakeholders in the institution. To buy into the program was very important. Like I said, because we were able to get the buy-in from both a VP of academic side and the VP of student services. The message came from above that we are here to support our students, that it's a welcoming campus, and that this program is here to welcome even new students from our community. And then they were able to pinpoint to faculty that would be open to serving our students. Additionally, what we also did, which one of the chair of the business department asked us to do, was to not only say that the classes were going to be for undocumented students, but that they would be open for all, because then it stopped this idea of a student being targeted or the class being targeted, because it was a class that could potentially have non-undocumented students in it.
Yes, and for us also, I think it was echoing what Oscar and Elisa just said. For us, it was very important that we had support. Those messages that come directly from the chancellor, from the vice chancellor, and from the presidents of specific campuses really is key for our students to feel safe. But on top of that, it's also important to systemize the training that we provide to all staff levels, and specifically to frontline student services. Because even if it's not the thing of safety itself, but just the way they treat students when they come to admissions, to the Broussard, and just having that as a language that is inclusive for all throughout the system, throughout the university, really helps create equity and also avoid any instance of prejudice, and just for our students to feel unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And it reminds me of something that we did, I forgot to mention. For all of the folks that were hosting students as sites, their staff had to go through our ally training before we allowed them to host a student, for exactly the reasons that Jose and Elisa have talked about.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We are unfortunately out of time, but I definitely encourage the participants of this webinar to reach out to our panelists for additional questions. Their contact information will be shared. And again, thank you so much to Jose, Dr. Hoyos Vences, Oscar, for being part of this wonderful conversation. We greatly appreciate your time. And so over the last few minutes, we're just going to go over some resources that you all have access to. So Vanessa will speak about some resources at Democracy at Work Institute.
Yes, thank you, Eliana. So we are sharing with you today a few different things that I think will be helpful. First of all, to have a better framing and understanding of what worker ownership is, if this is something new for you. And so if you go to our website, institute.coop, there's a resource guide that's very good. It actually has resources both in English and in Spanish. And there's some basic information about what is worker cooperatives. It also goes into governance, management, participation, decision-making, all the different things that are incorporated in when one owns a worker cooperative. So that's there. Also, we're sharing with you information on our monthly startup webinars. So these are live webinars where somebody is actually explaining how to start a co-op. So these are for people that want to start them, and it answers lots of questions and it guides you through that. Secondly, I'm sharing with you a rapid response co-op document that literally just describes a little bit about what I shared today, in case you want to share that with some of your colleagues and you want to get a conversation started and then set up a call with us, for example. So that's what I've been sharing with folks that are interested in exploring a partnership or collaboration. And lastly, a Radiate Consulting brochure. So it does actually have an email for the New York City Radiate in case you're interested in working with them, contracting with them, and just seeing what they offer. There's a website link there for Radiate Consulting. So those are the resources that we hope will be helpful just to get you thinking about this option. And yes.
Great, thank you so much, Vanessa. And just very quickly, at Immigrants Rising, we have a lot of resources and information about income generation options, regardless of immigration status. We have a fellowship program as well, in case anybody's interested in learning more about the fellowship housed at a nonprofit organization. We have a lot of networking opportunities through our Festival of Undocumented Innovation. We give money away as well to undocumented social entrepreneurs across the United States through our Kickstarter grants, and through our partnership with Venturize, we can do referrals to identify a local service provider across the US. Next slide, please. We also recommend Sama School, which is a great organization that trains individuals to become independent contractors. Their site has really amazing tools for students to be able to identify what opportunities are out there to engage in independent contractor work. Next slide, please. And then we have this additional resources slide. And again, the slides will be available to you. So I recommend that you click on all of these additional resources and learn more about additional organizations that provide a lot of great support to help students learn about ways to generate income regardless of immigration status. And we are out of time. So we again want to thank you so much to all of the participants who joined us for the entire hour and a half. We hope that you found this webinar useful and can really give you great ideas as to how to implement these kind of programs at your colleges and universities. Tanya, did you want to wrap up?
Just to let you know that the Google Drive that we've been sharing throughout the webinar has a lot of resources related to all the topics that we've talked about. We will send you a recording of this email in a day or two, along with the link again for you. You are welcome to contact any of the panelists or presenters that presented today with more questions. And just a final thank you to all who worked to make this scholarship happen. Miriam at President's Alliance, Juliana at Immigrants Rising, Vanessa at Workers Institute. I hope all of you got a lot out of this, and we will continue to share any resources we have. Thank you and have a good rest of the day, everybody.